for Academy cadets thought she was just a paper pusher. They trapped her on the range, daring her to shoot. But in 45 seconds of blinding fire, it wasn't just targets that went down, it was their careers. The air over the West Point Annex in the Hudson Valley had a blade's edge to it that October. The morning sun was a pale disk, struggling to burn through a thin layer of river mist that clung to the Catskill foothills. It carried the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the faint, sharp tang of cordite, the permanent perfume of the firing range. This was Anya Petrova's sanctuary. At 36, she moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years spent in places where wasted energy was a liability. Her ice blue eyes, the kind that seemed to register everything without revealing anything, scanned the empty lanes. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a tight, severe bun, not a single strand out of place. To the rotating casts of soldiers, Marines, and cadets who passed through her instruction, Staff Sergeant Petrova was an enigma, a quiet, unflappable professional whose past was a heavily redacted file. She parked her unassuming sedan, the crunch of gravel under the tires the only sound to break the morning stillness. Before getting out, she took a moment, a ritual she never skipped, to simply observe. The range was a familiar landscape of scarred wooden benches, faded brass warning signs, and paper targets that fluttered in the distance like pale ghosts. This annex wasn't just a training ground. It was a crucible, a place where the nation's future military elite came to hone their skills. And for the next 8 weeks, it was Anya's to command. Her reputation preceded her, though it was built on whispers and observations rather than stories she ever told. The other instructors, mostly grizzled NCOs with careers measured in decades, had quickly learned she was different. They saw it in the way she could field strip a rifle blindfolded, her hands moving with the fluid grace of a surgeon. They saw it in the way she read terrain during field exercises, her gaze picking out ambush points and cover with an instinct that couldn't be learned from a manual. Master Gunnery Sergeant Hayes, a man who'd seen 3 conflicts, once watched her diagnose and fix a stalled Humvee engine with little more than a multi-tool and a length of wire. "That ain't something they teach you in instructor school," he'd murmured to a subordinate, his eyes narrowed with a mixture of curiosity and deep respect. But Anya never elaborated. She'd just wiped the grease from her hands, her expression unreadable, and changed the subject to the day's ammunition requisitions. As she began setting up her lane, the sound of loud, confident laughter rolled across the range. Anya didn't need to turn around. She recognized the tone, the easy arrogance of young men who had never been told they weren't the smartest, strongest, and most important people in any given room. They rounded the corner of the equipment shed a moment later. 4 of them, West Point cadets in crisp, new fatigues with creases still sharp from the factory. They moved as a pack, their energy feeding off one another. Liam, the unspoken leader, was tall and effortlessly handsome, with a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite and an expensive-looking watch that was decidedly against regulations. He dropped his range bag onto a bench with a theatrical thud. "Morning, Sergeant," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Looks like we're your problem children for the day." Anya finished clipping a fresh target into its holder before turning to face them. "There are no problem children here, Cadet," she replied, her voice even and calm. "Only shooters. Your lanes are 4 through 7. We'll start with safety checks, then move to basic warm-ups." The other 3 fanned out, each a study in casual condescension. Marcus, a former college football player with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, slouched against a post, already looking bored. Caleb, smaller and wirier, had restless eyes that darted everywhere, cataloging the audience. And Noah, who wore thin, gold-rimmed glasses, watched Anya with the detached curiosity of scientists studying a specimen. He was the group strategist. As Anya began her standard inspection, moving down the line to check their chambers, the subtle campaign of disrespect began. "Trigger discipline, Marcus," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper as she noticed his index finger resting inside the trigger guard. Marcus withdrew it with a mocking flourish. "Right. Wouldn't want to give anyone a heart attack," he muttered, loud enough for Liam to hear. Liam chuckled. Getting safety lectures. Feels like we're back in basic, boys. Anya ignored it. She dealt with far worse than entitled cadets. Her focus was on the process, on the unyielding rules of the range. But as she continued her work, she felt the weight of their collective gaze, a silent, unified challenge. They thought they knew who she was, a by-the-book instructor, a woman in a man's world, someone to be tolerated but not respected. They had no idea how wrong they were. The warm-up drills were standard procedure, designed to build muscle memory and reinforce fundamentals. Stance, grip, breath control, trigger squeeze. For Anya, these weren't just steps. They were the sacred grammar of marksmanship. For the 4 cadets, they were in tedious formality to be endured. Their disrespect, initially confined to whispers and smirks, began to bleed into their actions. When Anya corrected Liam's stance, gently adjusting his elbow, he sighed with theatrical impatience. "Sergeant, with all due respect, I think I know how to stand. I've been shooting since I was 10. On a private range, your stance is your business." Anya replied, her voice as flat and unyielding as the steel of a rifle. "On my range, it's my business. It's the difference between a hit and a miss when your heart rate is 180 and the target is shooting back. Adjust your feet." Liam complied, but not before exchanging a look with Marcus that was pure poison. The drills continued, but the atmosphere had curdled. During a magazine change exercise, Marcus, with a clumsy, exaggerated motion, accidentally fumbled his ammunition box. Dozens of shiny brass rounds cascaded across the concrete floor at Anya's feet. "Whoops," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false apology. "Butterfingers. Guess I'm just all thumbs today." He grinned at his friends. "You mind getting those, Sergeant? My back's a little stiff from PT." The insult was blatant, a direct challenge to her authority designed to humiliate her. The handful of Marine recon trainees in the adjacent lanes stopped their own drills to watch. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. Anya looked down at the scattered rounds, then back up at Marcus's smug face. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't show a flicker of anger. She simply knelt, her movements fluid and unhurried, and began picking up the cartridges one by one. "A weapon is useless without ammunition, cadet," she said, her voice calm and instructive, as if he'd asked a genuine question. "And a soldier who can't manage his gear is a liability to his unit. Remember that." She placed the last round back in the box and handed it to him, her ice blue eyes meeting his for a brief, intense moment. Marcus took the box, his smirk faltering slightly. He had expected a confrontation, an argument. He hadn't expected to be so calmly and professionally disarmed. But the incident only emboldened them. They saw her refusal to engage as weakness, not discipline. The final straw came from Caleb. During a controlled fire drill, as Anya called for slow, deliberate shots, Caleb decided to showcase his own version of skill. Instead of aiming at his designated target, he raised his muzzle slightly and fired his last round into the earthen berm high above the target line. Crack! The sound was sharp, distinct from the others. A puff of dust erupted from the berm, far from any intended target. It was a flagrant and dangerous violation of range safety. "Misfire, Sergeant," Caleb called out, feigning surprise. "Weapon must have jumped on me." Noah, the strategist, chimed in. "Maybe we're just not suited for this slow and steady stuff. Some of us perform better under pressure. You know, competition." Liam seized the opening. "That's a great idea. How about it, Sergeant? Let's make this interesting. The 4 of us against you. Time drill. Speed and accuracy. Or are you worried we'll show you up?" The challenge hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown down in front of everyone. The Marines were now openly staring. Even the range safety officer, a seasoned master sergeant, had his hand hovering over his radio. This was a deliberate attempt to force her hand. Either break protocol and accept their childish challenge, or back down and lose any semblance of control. Anya turned to face them, her expression a mask of professional calm. "This is a controlled training environment, not a contest," she said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "We will stick to the designated course of fire. Is that understood?" Loud and clear, Liam said, his voice laced with mockery. He turned to the others and shook his head in feigned disappointment. Figures. Anya saw the looks they exchanged, the triumphant smirks that said they'd won. They believed they had pushed her into a corner and exposed her as a timid bureaucrat. She turned her back on them and addressed the entire line. "Cease fire. We'll take a 15-minute break. Clear your weapons and step back from the firing line." As the cadets sauntered off, laughing amongst themselves, Anya knew this was far from over. They had mistaken her patience for fear. It was a common mistake, and it was one she was beginning to realize she would have to correct. The 15-minute break was a tactical retreat for most, a chance to rehydrate and escape the relentless sun. But for Liam and his crew, it was an opportunity. Anya remained at her station, methodically field-stripping her service rifle for a quick cleaning. It was a familiar, grounding ritual, the scent of solvent and the cool touch of steel a comfort. Keeping her hands busy kept her mind clear. She was aware of them long before they moved. They were circling, not like wolves, but with the feigned casualness of sharks sensing blood. Liam was the first to approach, wandering over to the equipment rack under the pretense of examining a set of ear protectors. Marcus followed, wiping his brow with the back of his hand, positioning himself on her other side. Then came Caleb and Noah, completing the circle from behind, effectively boxing her in against her own workbench. There was no physical contact, but the intent was as clear as a gunshot. The low chatter on the range began to die down as others noticed the unfolding drama. The Marines, who had been observing with professional interest, now watched with hawk-like intensity. This was no longer a simple case of trainees testing an instructor. It had escalated into a public and deliberate challenge to the chain of command. Liam leaned forward, placing his palms flat on the bench, invading her personal space. His smirk was gone, replaced by a look of predatory confidence. "So, Sergeant," he began, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Let's cut the crap. We all know this by-the-book routine is just for show. What do you really know about shooting under pressure?" Anya didn't look up from her rifle. She slid the bolt carrier group back into the upper receiver with a smooth, oiled click. "I know enough to stay alive," she said simply, her voice devoid of emotion. Marcus let out a dismissive snort. "Yeah, we're not talking about staying alive. We're talking about performing. Speed, competition, the kind of thing that gets you noticed. The kind of thing that proves you belong here." "Maybe she's never had to prove it," Caleb added from behind her, his voice a sly insinuation. Noah, the quiet one, stepped closer, his glasses glinting in the sun. "We could settle it right now. No more talk. 4 of us, 1 of you. 5 targets each. Fastest time, most accurate hits. Let's see what you're really made of." The air crackled. This was it. The final push. They had cornered her, surrounded her with their arrogance and entitlement, and issued their ultimatum in front of an audience. Backing down now would mean the end of her authority, not just with them, but with every soldier on that base who witnessed it. Anya slowly raised her head, her ice blue eyes moving from one face to the next. She held each of their gazes for a fraction of a second, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of a generator and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Then she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Pick your lanes." A triumphant grin split Liam's face. He'd won. They'd broken her. He turned to his crew, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. "You heard the lady. Let's get set up. You're about to get a real lesson in marksmanship, Sergeant." As they swaggered toward the firing line, brimming with confidence, Anya calmly reassembled her sidearm. What none of them saw, what no one but the most observant pair of eyes would have noticed, was the figure standing near the main observation tower at the far end of the range. Colonel Eva Rostova, the base commander, stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her cap pulled low. She was a legend in her own right, a woman who had clawed her way to the top in a world designed by and for men. She had come for an unannounced inspection of the training exercises. From her vantage point, she had a perfect, unobstructed view of 4 of her most promising cadets cornering a lone female NCO. She said nothing. She didn't move. She just watched, her face a mask of stone. The 4 cadets claimed their lanes, the sound of their cocky banter echoing slightly in the tense silence that had fallen over the range. Liam cracked his knuckles like a boxer before a title fight. Marcus stretched his thick arms, a smug grin plastered on his face. They were actors on a stage of their own making, certain of the final act. Anya walked to the center lane, directly opposite them. She moved without haste, her presence a pocket of calm in the swirling currents of testosterone and tension. She placed her rifle on the bench and began her preparations. Each movement was deliberate, economical, and imbued with a reverence for the tools of her trade. She checked her magazine, the round seated perfectly. She slid it into the rifle with a solid, satisfying click. A clean pull on the charging handle chambered the first round. She then drew her sidearm, performing the same swift, precise check. The audience had grown. The Marine Recon team now stood in a silent, watchful line. A few Air Force security police on their break had drifted over. The range safety officer stood by with a stopwatch, his expression a mixture of apprehension and morbid curiosity. He knew he was about to witness either a profound humiliation or something truly extraordinary. The drill is simple, Anya announced, her voice carrying clearly across the lanes, cutting through the anticipation. Rifle to pistol transition. 5 targets each, staggered distances. You fire at your pace. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the 4 of them. I'll fire at mine. Don't go easy on us, Sergeant, Liam called back, his voice dripping with condescension. Anya didn't reply. She simply gave a nod to the range safety officer. He raised the stopwatch. Shooters, stand by. Go! Before the last syllable of the word had left his lips, Anya's rifle was at her shoulder. The first shot was a deafening crack that seemed to split the air. It happened so fast that the cadets were still fumbling to acquire their sight picture. Crack, crack. A double tap to the first target, 2 holes appearing in the center mass. So close together, they looked like a single, rag tear. Without a flicker of wasted motion, she pivoted at the waist, her body a perfectly calibrated machine. The rifle flowed to the next target, as if guided by an invisible force. Crack, crack, crack. 3 rounds, a tight triangle in the target's head box. It wasn't just the speed that was astonishing. It was the absolute, inhuman efficiency. Her muzzle didn't dip or waver. Her breathing was controlled. A slow, steady exhale with each trigger pull. Her ice blue eyes were locked downrange, her focus absolute. She was a symphony of controlled violence. The rifle spoke again and again, each report a percussive beat in a deadly rhythm, each ejected brass casing a glint of gold in the afternoon sun. The experienced shooters in the crowd were mesmerized. This wasn't range shooting. This was the muscle memory of 1,000 hostile nights, the practiced art of someone who had fired under conditions they could only read about in after-action reports. In a single, fluid motion, she hit the magazine release. The empty rifle mag fell away as her support hand guided the weapon to a low-ready position. Her dominant hand was already moving, a blur of motion toward her hip. The pistol was out of the holster and rising to meet her eye level before the empty rifle magazine had even clattered onto the concrete. The transition was a work of art. Where most would lose precious seconds fumbling the handoff, Anya's was seamless. The pistol came up, sights perfectly aligned, and began to sing its own deadly song. Pop pop. 2 rounds to the chest of the 3rd target. POP. A single, precise shot to the head. She flowed to the next target, then the next, her arm an extension of her will. Halfway through her pistol drill, the cadets had barely finished with their rifles. Their shots were hurried, scattered across the paper. Their confident smirks had been wiped away, replaced by slack-jawed disbelief. They weren't just being beaten, they were being clinically, brutally, and silently dismantled. Between her own shots, without ever taking her eyes off the targets, Anya's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. Liam, you're anticipating the recoil. Marcus, stop slapping the trigger. Caleb, square your stance. Noah, control your breathing. She was diagnosing their flaws while executing a flawless drill of her own. The sheer impossibility of it stunned the crowd into absolute silence. The final pistol round punched a perfect hole through the dead center of the farthest target's head box. She performed a tactical reload on pure instinct, seating a fresh magazine and bringing the weapon back to a low-ready position. The entire range was still. "Cease fire," the range safety officer finally called out, his voice hoarse. He clicked a stopwatch. Time, 45 seconds. Anya didn't look at him. She holstered her pistol, cleared her rifle, and stepped back from a line, her breathing as steady as it had been at the start. The officer walked downrange, his steps slow and deliberate. He returned holding her 5 targets. He held them up for everyone to see. Every single round, from both rifle and pistol, was a kill shot. The groupings were so tight, they were breathtaking. A low whistle escaped from one of the Marines. Another muttered, "Holy hell." The 4 cadets stood frozen, their own targets a testament to their failure. They had come seeking a victory. Instead, they had received a revelation. And it was into that stunned silence that a new voice spoke, calm, measured, and carrying the weight of absolute command. "I believe," Colonel Rostova said, stepping forward from the shadows of the observation tower, "that the lesson is now complete." The moment Colonel Eva Rostova stepped into the light, the atmosphere on the range shifted from tense to glacial. If Anya's demonstration had been a shockwave, the colonel's presence was the epicenter of an earthquake. The crowd of onlookers, from the seasoned Marines to the greenest privates, instinctively straightened their postures. The cadets went rigid, their faces draining of all color. Liam's jaw, which had been hanging open in disbelief, snapped shut with an audible click. Colonel Rostova moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace, her polished boots crunching on the gravel. Each step seemed to amplify the silence. She didn't look at the targets or at Anya. Her gaze, as sharp and penetrating as Anya's, was fixed solely on the 4 young men who now looked like statues carved from fear. She stopped just behind them, her hands clasped behind her back. "Cadets," she began, her voice not loud, but carrying an authority that made shouting unnecessary. "I came here today for a surprise inspection, and I must say, I have been treated to a very educational performance. No one dared to breathe. I watched 4 of West Point's finest, men we were grooming for leadership, corner a senior NCO on her own range," she continued, her tone dangerously level. "I watched you use intimidation and peer pressure to try and coerce her into breaking protocol for your own amusement. You didn't see an instructor. You saw a target. You saw a woman you thought you could bully." She took a slow step, walking behind them, her shadow falling over each one in turn. "And then I watched that same NCO, with perfect discipline and flawless execution, outperform all 4 of you combined without breaking a sweat. She did it in 45 seconds. She taught you a lesson about marksmanship, but it seems I must be the one to teach you the lesson about respect." She stopped in front of Liam, who stared straight ahead, a single bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. "You came to this base to learn advanced combat skills. Instead, you have spent your morning demonstrating to every soldier on this installation that you possess the one quality most toxic to a leader: arrogance without competence." Marcus swallowed hard, his thick neck looking suddenly fragile. "That ends today," Rostova declared. She turned her head slightly, addressing the range master who had been watching the entire exchange. "Master Sergeant, effective immediately, Staff Sergeant Petrova is designated the lead weapons instructor for all incoming Academy cadet training rotations at Fort Yates. All of them. Her program, her rules. No exceptions." The range master's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before he snapped to attention. "Understood, Colonel." Rostova's gaze returned to the 4 cadets, pinning them in place. "You 4 will be her first official class under this new directive. You will treat Sergeant Petrova with the respect you would show a commanding general. You will address her as Sergeant. You will follow her orders without question and you will learn everything she has to teach. If I hear so much as a whisper of insubordination, you will find yourselves recycled through basic training so many times you'll forget you ever saw the inside of West Point. Am I clear? Yes, Colonel. The four voices were a single, panicked bark. Then, in a final, decisive move that sealed the moment in base history, Colonel Rostova turned and addressed Anya directly in front of everyone. Sergeant Petrova, you handled a volatile situation with a level of professionalism and restraint that is a credit to your rank. You did not escalate. You educated. That is the standard I expect from my leaders. Carry on. Yes, Colonel, Anya replied. Her voice was steady, professional, without a hint of triumph. With a final, sharp nod, Colonel Rostova turned and walked away, the crowd parting for her like the sea. The spell was broken only when the sound of her vehicle, driving away, faded into the distance. The normal sounds of the range slowly returned, but nothing was the same. A fundamental shift had occurred. Everyone there knew they had just witnessed more than a shooting demonstration. They had witnessed a transfer of power, a re-establishment of order, delivered with surgical precision. When training resumed, the transformation was absolute. The four cadets moved with the stiff, precise motions of wind-up toys. The smirks and whispers were gone, replaced by wide, attentive eyes and the crisp, repeated chorus of, "Yes, Sergeant." Liam, who had been the ringleader, was now the most diligent student, his brow furrowed in concentration with every instruction. Marcus no longer slouched. He stood at a perfect parade rest whenever Anya spoke. Their arrogance had been stripped away, cauterized by 45 seconds of blinding skill and the cold fire of their commander's wrath. Anya, for her part, didn't change her teaching style one bit. She was the same patient, methodical instructor she had been that morning. She made the same corrections, offered the same quiet guidance. If she felt any satisfaction from their newfound respect, she didn't show it. The victory wasn't personal, it was professional. The point wasn't to be right, it was to ensure they were ready. Now, finally they were. Word of the 45-second sermon, as it was quickly dubbed, spread through the base like wildfire. By the afternoon session, NCOs from other units found excuses to wander past the range, ostensibly checking on their own troops, but really stealing glances at the quiet female instructor who had tamed four of West Point's most arrogant cadets. Near the end of the day, Master Gunnery Sergeant Hayes, the old salt who'd seen it all, ambled over to Anya's lane. He watched for a few minutes as she ran the cadets through a complex failure-to-fire drill. He noted their focused intensity and immediate compliance. Heard there was a bit of a spirited educational event this morning, he said, his voice a low rumble when she had a moment. Just a training demonstration, Gunny, Anya replied, wiping down her rifle. Hayes nodded slowly, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. 45 seconds. That's what I heard. That kind of weapon control, you don't learn that from a manual. He looked at her, a question in his eyes, but like the others, he knew better than to ask. Those boys needed a lesson in humility, he said instead. Academy breeds confidence. It takes a true professional to show them the line between that and competence. He gave her a nod of profound, earned respect, and walked away. As the final ceasefire was called, and the cadets were cleaning their weapons with a newfound reverence, Marcus approached her bench. He stood there for a moment, shifting his weight before finally speaking. "Sergeant," he said, his voice quiet, his eyes fixed on the ground. We were out of line today. There's no excuse. Thank you for the lesson." Anya paused her cleaning and looked at him. "The lesson isn't for me, cadet," she said. "It's for the soldiers you'll lead one day. Don't let them down." She nodded once, and he returned to his station, the weight of her words clearly settling on his shoulders. By the time she had packed her range bag and was walking back to her car, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the gravel. The targets from her demonstration were gone. Someone had already claimed them as souvenirs. She allowed herself the smallest hint of a smile, a fleeting warmth in her ice-blue eyes. The story of that day would become part of the base's folklore, a tale told to new recruits and cocky trainees for years to come. The 4 cadets would go on to finish their rotation with the highest marks in their class. Their skills forged in the fire of a profound and public humbling. They learned that the most dangerous weapon on any battlefield isn't a rifle, but the quiet professional holding it. Have you ever seen arrogance turn into respect that quickly? Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who let their actions do all the talking. If this story reminded you that true strength doesn't need a shout, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the quiet professionals who command respect. Share this with someone who needs to see it, and check out another story on your screen right now. And in the comment below, tell us about a time you saw someone earn respect the hard way. As always, let's comment with respect. We'll see you in the next one.